I'm really pleased and honoured to be speaking about Yvonne today, for myself as a friend and on behalf of the Union of Australian Women. Some of us are here today, and I acknowledge my friend here, Evelyn Gregg, who was a contemporary of Yvonne's, but some from the very early days, from the beginning, but others were unable to come due to ill health, distance, the annoyances of age, and the lasting effects of the pandemic. Yvonne joined the UAW in the early 50s in Sunshine and was involved ever since in the many issues, campaigns, countless activities that fill me with admiration for the UAW women each time I dip into our history left-wing ladies. Peace, community activism, anti-war, childcare, living conditions, health, the list is endless. I got to know Yvonne when I became actively involved in the late 80s, and more so after I retired in 2000. Sheila Bayard, who first met Yvonne in the 60s, remembers her fondly then when she was in some angst about finding appropriate childcare in the area. And she said Yvonne had such a cheerful way of putting into perspective one's own difficulties by drawing on her own lived experience of juggling work and family. And maybe she was often having a lead foot on her car, because in childcare at that time, if you didn't turn up at closing 5:30, the cops were called, and then maybe social services. So there was some real reason as well. I'm not justifying it, believe it. There could have been a reason. But for me, it's been 20 plus years of solid and valued friendship. She was an altogether brilliant woman. She had good organisational skills and was multi-talented. There were 3 issues on which she had major impact. The first was equal pay. She was claims officer and research officer at the Meat Workers Union and was most amused to discover her reputation as the Sheila in the office who was excellent at sorting things out. She was able to promote equal pay with a supporting union through the women's page of the union newsletter, which she edited, and generally through union work, organising marches, handouts, factory visits. She was a constant in the campaign for equal pay. She was part of those great stunts of boarding a tram and only offering 3/4 of the fare because that was what the average women's wage was. When Zelda Crano chained herself to the doors of the Commonwealth buildings, she was not alone, as is often the impression. Yvonne and Betty Ollie were standing beside her, handing out leaflets. She was part of the Council for Action for Equal Pay, which was reactivated in 1984. Having first been formed in 1937. That campaign was a constant, and we haven't still got there, as Yvonne reminded us all at her 90th birthday celebrations. The second was DES action. In 1979, the UAW decided to call a public meeting about health concerns resulting from the prescription of a drug whose name I cannot pronounce, an artificial hormone to combat morning sickness and to prevent miscarriages, which had been prescribed for years. It was found to be dangerous, causing cancers, abnormalities and sterility in children. In September of that year, Yvonne convened a public meeting and DES action was born. In 1981, a major goal was achieved with the opening of a clinic dealing with this health issue at the Royal Women's Hospital. Yvonne was instrumental in establishing this organisation and stepped back as soon as it got going. The third was in the early 80s. Yvonne set to work on behalf of the UAW to establish an historical women's data kit, putting women in a Victorian and Australian timeline. The office had been receiving calls from all sorts of people seeking information about when certain events happened. So it was decided that the UAW would do something about it. While she didn't work alone, Yvonne was the linchpin. She compiled and edited Taking Time, published in the early 80s. It is just a brilliant, invaluable book of information, documentation, great Mary Looney cartoons, and fascinating interest. And she did it without computers. She had a good sense of humour. When she was editor of the UAW monthly newsletter, I became her sidekick. There were lots of good women in the organisation, many with our own idiosyncratic ways. Ruth Crowe, who some of you will remember, was one. She could be intense and focused on what she wanted to tell you, then she was gone. She rang the office one day to tell me something, then said abruptly, "Well, ta-da," and hung up before I could even get a word in edgeways. Exasperated, I turned to Yvonne and said, "Bloody Ruth Crowe, the older she gets, the more she becomes," and stopped because I was lost for words. Yvonne had this cheeky grin and suggested, "Ruth Crowish." Exactly. Yvonne didn't fuss about. One day I'd been to the post office, and coming back to our office in then Ross House, I fell over in the middle of Flinders Lane. I don't remember anyone rushing to help. Maybe it happened quickly and I sorted myself, and at least I didn't get squished by a car. With a hole in my pants and grazed knee and hands, I dragged myself back up to the second floor and told Yvonne and Vera Hunt the sad story. Yvonne reached for the first aid tin, which I didn't know existed, got out disinfectant and whatever soap I could go and clean myself up. Vera put on the kettle and had a cup of sweet black tea waiting for me. I don't remember either of them saying anything much, certainly not something like, "Oh my God." No dramas, just action. But there was also, you reminded me, Jeff, a second tin in the office, which was probably put there by Yvonne because it had hammers in it. Be prepared must have been her motive. We decided to nominate Yvonne for Wells Vida Goldstein Award in 2000. She was diffident about that, but we persuaded her, and we were truly pleased when the nomination was successful because it was more than well deserved. Yvonne contributed and participated at all levels. She was highly respected and impressed us all with her knowledge and her quiet ways. She expressed her opinions clearly and succinctly, and said she had decided that she would never not say what she thought just because it might be against some doctrinaire point of view. She was measured and steadfast, unpretentious and wise, a woman of many parts and multi-talented, a writer, a musician, a woodworker, a fisherwoman, a sister in crime, a community activist. She was just fabulous. People on the whole live the best life that they can. For myself, I think that if we can participate and speak up for ourselves and for others, if we can try to leave the world a better place for all, if we can appreciate life, then we've done all right. And Yvonne certainly did that. We shall miss her hugely, but we salute her.